Hi, welcome to Day Witness podcast. Now, you probably heard a little bit about us from the She Witness project. So the idea of the Day Witness project is all about the topic of discrimination. So here today we have Isabel. She's a Spanish human resources professional based in Oslo. She has been in Norway for 11 years now and has just recently become a citizen. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Today she is the Senior Vice President of People and Culture at the Oslo green energy startup Skyfri. But when immigrating to Norway, she has a career reset like many immigrants do. Was a student, was a waiter, and a kitchen assistant before she returned to the office work. Her work involved growing diverse, effective, and respectful teams for fast-growing startups. Her work is, of course, tightly coupled with her own belief in diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as the LGBT representation. With this perspective in mind, and as a minority in Norway, she has seen her fair share of discrimination, both major and minor. So today we'll be talking a little bit more about her discrimination in workplaces, as well as in the health sector. So why don't we jump into your first memorable experience of discrimination in Norway? And thank you again for sharing your story here and coming in today.
Well, thank you for having me. I think the first experiences I have were quite minor experience, were the typical small microaggressions that I think we all face. That usually had to do with the over-sexualizing of Spanish women, like they are hot, you know how to use well your hips and whatnot, and some sort of different treatment somehow in stores, for example, or in the supermarket, but I didn't really recognize it at first. For me it was like, oh, this person is rude, or oh, that's odd, because I have had no experiences before with discrimination. Not because of my ethnic background, at least. I have had experience of discrimination as a woman or as a queer person, but I was born and raised in a country where I was the ethnic majority. So it was coming to Norway when I first started to face this, and I think really the first time that I noticed that, you know, I was being discriminated against was maybe 3-4 months into being in Norway. I had applied to a position. And I called asking about, you know, the status of my application, and they told me, well, we are sorry, but we are looking for an ethnic Norwegian for this position. And this was the first time when I noticed, like, okay, there is something different with me here. I'm now a minority. Yeah.
Right. And they actually explicitly said to you, we're looking for a native Norwegian.
Yes, right. And this was the only time they have explicitly said so. Before, I have had situations where if I sent my CV with a Norwegian name, then I will be called, but then the interview will be cancelled once they hear my accent in Norwegian, or where I would simply not be called, but then see that they have hired a person with less qualifications than me, but ethnic Norwegian. But never has been explicitly said at this time.
Oh. And how long did it take you in order to land your first job then, after this series of, you know, discrimination in the hiring process?
It took me around 6 months, I think. Even though I came with already around 9 years of experience in HR administrative positions in Spain. And it was at a waitress, as a waitress and cook, and of course it was as a tapas restaurant, a Spanish tapas restaurant. This was the first job I got. And later on, I continued as a kitchen assistant for almost 2 years, and I didn't come back to jobs that were more closely related to my actual education and work experiences until I started working for the Embassy of Afghanistan. This was around 3 to 4 years before I came to Norway.
How does that process, how did you feel about that process, and how did it impact you? Because it took you a long time to get back into your own professional expertise area.
Yeah, well, it impacts you in many levels. It impacts you economically, for example, because of course I wasn't able to make a lot of money. And in this sense, I was lucky because I had a partner. But it would have been very difficult for me to stay had I been alone or by myself. And then it also it brings quite a lot of like despair, because what can you do? It becomes to a moment where I say, I cannot change who I am, you know, and I really don't get any sort of support to be able to enter in the workforce to the level of my abilities. I learned Norwegian, but for example, one of the feedback I got from my professor was that I was going to fail the class. And I asked her why, because I had a much better level of Norwegian than the rest of the people in the class, as I was working as a kitchen assistant and everybody spoke in Norwegian there. And she said, well, when you speak in Norwegian, it's very obvious that you are Spanish. And it's like, well, I've never claimed to be from Trondheim. It's not bad to have an accent, and you know that people might guess that I am Spanish. There is nothing wrong with that. But then I notice when we speak about accents, very few people gets criticized for accents that are very difficult to understand, like for example Scottish or Tennessee accent. But for example, other native English speakers like Indians, Jamaicans or Kenyans, they are criticized by the accent. And I noticed that at the end of the day, it's not whether people can understand you or not, it's whether the way you talk sounds white enough.
How does that make you feel then, in the sense that the accent you can't change?
No.
You know, that's part of your identity, right?
Yeah.
So you're walking in there going, I don't know how you exactly feel, but I can only imagine that you present who you are to them, and for them to go like, I don't like you.
Yeah.
Just based on one accent of yours, where even though you understand Norwegian, you know. So could you, I don't know, walk through the process of how you feel in those moments, you know?
Yeah, well, I must admit that I tried to fix my accent, both in English and Norwegian. But at the end, I came to the realization that it's part of my identity. I don't need to hide that I'm from Spain in order to conform with what is supposed to be socially correct. But also at the end of the day, when somebody tells you there is something wrong with the way you speak, because the way you speak sounds Spanish, they are telling you there is something wrong with showing who you are. There is something wrong with people getting to know that you are not from here.
Right.
And I think it happens probably to all people who are not native speakers of English or Norwegian. We hear, for example, terms like kebab norsk, for example. Even for those who are native speakers of Norwegian, but they just have some sort of sociolect or accent. When they speak perfect Norwegian, they just, you know, probably the pronunciation is a bit different.
And I think it's interesting, we'll go back into this because you're a recruiter now.
Yes.
So you're on the other side with
Yes.
a little bit of power in a certain way. And I know that besides the hiring process that you felt discriminated, on top of that you also had another experience on top of this particular discrimination. Would you like to talk about it?
Well, I have had several experiences, sadly. I think probably the one that was most traumatizing for me was when I went to the gynecologist. So I went to the gynecologist once, and this was during the examination. So it's a very vulnerable moment because you are with a person who you don't know at all. This was actually the first time I had gone to this specific medical provider. Of course, I was naked from the waist down, and he was examining me, and I mentioned that I wanted to have some sort of birth control. I wanted to take the pill, and he said, yes, I usually do not give receipts for the pill, but I will give it to you because your kind breeds a lot, and I need to make sure that you don't take over Norway. And of course, it's a very vulnerable moment because you are there, you are naked. It's not that you can just I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do, to be honest. Yeah.
So to clarify, she said that the gynecologist said that your kind of breeds a lot.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to give you this pill so you're not going to take over Norway.
Yes.
For me, listening to that is horrific.
Yeah.
And he crossed the line for me, and that's not even professional.
Yeah.
It makes me so angry. Honestly, right now I'm so angry and I'm so emotional as well. So, and also you were vulnerable, waist down as well. And
Very, yeah.
to a man,
Yes.
obviously, and he's saying such a thing. It's like, do you just want to slap him? Honestly, I don't even, if I could say that, I'm sorry. But it's got to a point where, you know, you're not the first person I've heard who had such issues with the gynecologist, or even through the health sector, where the words that come out of their mouths are astonishing. Like, that they don't have a limit almost, that they know that they can say that to you almost.
Yeah, it's
like no one's...
It's so over the line.
Yeah, so over the line that somehow they feel like they can get away with it because they know like you're a foreigner somehow.
Yeah.
And perhaps that you don't know the system well enough to complain or anything like that. So on top of that as well, with the hiring process, you're going to your language courses and your language teacher basically told you you're not good enough. And now you're going to a gynecologist who's also saying you're not good enough, you know. So with these multiple like discriminations that you have experienced, and I can see that you're a strong person as well. And what I've already heard is that you overcame that and so you don't want that, you know, to impact you in a way. So, because I don't want to put words in your mouth either, so how did you navigate all of those repeated discrimination time and time over? What was the thing that you said to yourself to go through all that?
To be honest, I don't think I navigated it well. And if I could go back, of course, this is very easy to see with the gift of hindsight after the deed. But if I could go back, I will do it differently because at this moment I did not speak up at any of those instances or any other. And I think that maybe I should have. I also understand, and it allowed me to understand why people do not speak up. Because, as I mentioned it before, I have never been discriminated for my ethnic background. I'm average Spanish, like the other 40 million there. It happened first here. And I really didn't know what to do. And I always thought that, oh, if this ever happens to me, I will fight. But then you start to think do I want to go through all this again? Am I going to be believed? Who do I talk to? Should I talk to somebody? Or even, should I say something? Because I also struggle with the fact that I am privileged. I am Spanish, I am a European citizen. I am privileged over those who are not European citizens and are depending on a visa to stay here and might not be able to speak up as much. For example, if something happens in their workplace. I'm privileged over people who is black or women who decide to wear some sort of head covering. My life is easier than them. And I do accept that. But it also made me wonder, do I have the right to complain? You know, because other of the feedback you get is, well, but you have it easy, and it's like, yes, I do, but you know,
I can understand that standpoint, you know, and I think you're humble and very aware as well of your position, and I would like to say that your pain is your pain, and don't minimize it, don't compare it to others, because I think your experience is still unique, it's still painful for you in particular. And I heard this as well from a lot of like Europeans who are white, who feel like their pain is not as deep as a black person and so forth. And maybe it isn't, but still, you went through that. You went through that pain, and you had to go through that, and no one can take that away from you. And I just want you to know that. You know, obviously with my skin color is yellow, you know, it's like, I don't know, in between a white and a black, I don't know. But you know, it's, you know, even for me, like, I do have racism experience. I have gone through my own traumas this here. And I think not having that pain validated is really sad, I think. It's really, and so, like what you experienced, like it's multiple discrimination, one thing after another, and does impact you. And what I'm hearing is impacting you, like economically, like you said before that, and also emotionally as well. So during that process of when you're going through these things, did you have someone, a friend to talk to? Did you turn to someone to, you know, talk about the discrimination you've gone through? Was there someone for you at that time?
There were some friends for me in Spain who were there for me, but not in Norway, not really. My partner is Norwegian, and I noticed that my partner did not understand.
No.
He's ethnic Norwegian, and I remember having with him the conversation and telling him, if you have a foreign name, you will not be called for interviews. And he was like, no, this doesn't happen. And I told him, okay, let's try. And I sent my CVs, same one, you know, both with my name and my Norwegianized name and his family name. His family name is Johansen, so it's very Norwegian. And I got called as Johansen, but never as Ros. Even though if you read my CV, it's obvious that I am Spanish. And this shows you that people just look at the name, you know, and this is what made him understand that, yes, you know, he may have not seen it, and of course not experienced it, but there is discrimination in Norway. But anyway, I don't think I have found the resources in Norway, at least not at this time. Now, yes, but at least not at this time.
Do you think that your Norwegian partner supports you enough now? The fact that he's seen what you've gone through and you told your stories, do you think that he is starting to understand and supporting you a bit more?
Yeah,
in a way?
But it's been years of hard work.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
And also, like, your background is in HR and also in as a recruiter, and now you are working in this field. Tell me what you think of what kind of solution could we have here in Norway, given your background and given your experiences, as a way forward for Norway, for a better Norway, for everyone?
Do you mean this on a broadly societal level or more in terms of work?
In terms of work, I guess, but also on top of that, I like to hear, like, if you have any other ideas. I'm kind of really open, really. It's just kind of exploring the idea of what can be done, really. That's what I'm trying to explore with you, is what could be done. You have a HR background. What can be done on that level as a recruiter, but also as a human being, as a Spanish person here, living here, going through other stuff as well. What could be done there, you know? Yeah. What do you think?
Well, in terms of, both in terms of society and work, I noticed that Norway basically lives in an ethnic apartheid, where ethnic Norwegians are in one side, and immigrants or non-ethnic or not ethnic Norwegians are in the other side. And you can see this in terms of work. I work in startups, and I work in startups and scale-ups because they are actually the only companies that have a diverse workforce. But if you look at any other Norwegian company, you will see that everybody is ethnic Norwegian. And I have seen companies where, yeah, there are like maybe 50, 60 employees and the company is based in Oslo and everybody is ethnic Norwegian. And I wonder, this is not even a sample of the population of Oslo, you know? And sometimes I wonder why I never see in office positions, for example, I never see people from a Somali background. I never see people from a Pakistani background. Everybody is ethnic Norwegian or German, Anglo-Saxon, you know, but very few people, for example, Colombia or even Spain, Greece, you know, the southern European countries. There are a lot of things that can be done in terms of work. I can speak a lot about this, but certainly, I don't know how deep you want me to go in this, but
please, we have time. So.
Yes. So, well, first of all, it's not only about getting people into your company, getting diverse people into your company. It's also about maintaining them, because if not, you get what we call the diversity hire. You know, everybody is ethnic Norwegian, and then you have the diversity hire, no? And also getting them in position of responsibility, because I also see a lot of companies that say we are very diverse, but then you see their organization chart and the diversity is in the lowest level. There are a lot of things you can do about this, from anonymized applications, for example, to having recruiting processes and procedures that try to eliminate most of the bias. For example, having small tests or tasks where a person can show their skills, several people in each step of the process, so there is only not one opinion, and so on and so forth. But mostly, the job is to make people understand the biases, both conscious and unconscious, they have when they are recruiting, or also when they are speaking with their colleagues or managers or direct reports. And those are things you hear a lot. Like, for example, things I have heard in companies I've worked in is like, Spaniards are lazy, or I'm sorry you want to take siesta. Like, nobody in Spain takes siesta. This is a cliche. Or, for example, one thing you hear a lot about Asian people, especially Chinese or Japanese people, is like, they are very hardworking, but they are uninventive.
Not inventive.
Okay. Yeah. This is something you hear about. Or, you know, if you hire a Muslim, they cannot really adapt, or they are going to be weird around the women. You hear all these small biases that people actually have, you know. And same happened to women, same happened to queer people, and let's not speak about people with disabilities as well. And this is something that you need to work against day by day. In your place of work. But you also need, in this sense, you also need a strong commitment from the directors or the founders or whoever makes the last decisions in the company, because you cannot really bring a diverse team if you are not being supported to do so. And also in more of broader Norwegian society, we come back to the same thing. I see that people live very apart, and there are a lot of ethnic Norwegians who never interact with anybody who is an ethnic Norwegian unless they go to buy a kebab. I remember I don't know if you know Oslo Debatten.
Oslo Debatten, yes.
Yes. And there was one Norwegian, like, very amazed. You know, he was writing about going to, you know, buy fruits and vegetables in Greenland, you know, and he was like, whoa, and you have so many things, like, if it was an amazing discovery. And I was so surprised at this, like, first, there is not a shop called Greenland. And then it's like, you literally never, like, saw a fruktogrønt and entered it inside, you know? So I think that from one hand, a lot of ethnic Norwegians do not have experiences social experiences with people from other backgrounds, and this makes them worry. And because you feel this worriness, this kind of uneasiness, you also close yourself into your own group. And I think, I don't know if this is your experience, but for me it's been near impossible to have Norwegian friends.
Yeah, and I think the problem is just like there is, I find it, especially with Norwegians who haven't traveled, who haven't, like you said, met with other minorities or, non-native Norwegians. I find that they have, I almost feel objectified.
Yes.
Like, I know that there's so much in depth of all this, sort of exoticness of the foreigner, is like playing into that lens of looking at you in such a exotic way that it makes me feel icky inside. It's like, don't look at me like that, or don't think about this in that sort of way. And for me, it's kind of strange that we're still back there at that point again. Like somehow, why is it such a major thing? Like you talk about this article of this Norwegian lady going into a store. For me, it's like that's normal.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't that be normalized?
Yeah.
Why should it be scary to walk into there? I don't know. It's a very strange way, and I think I feel like they have a lot of fear, and they haven't worked on that fear, and they haven't quite overcome it in my head. I kind of feel like somehow they haven't processed in a sense of meaning new things. And I find it really strange in the sense that the fact that they are Vikings.
Yeah.
Right? I always thought Norwegians in my head, they're Vikings, they're strong, they're out, they're explorators, they go out if they're exploring things. But then when I came here, I was just like, I was quite surprised.
Yeah, a lot of things have changed in the last 1,000 years.
Like sometimes how close-minded they are, and how narrow-minded they are, and sometimes they don't think that what they said has some kind of impact on foreigners in certain ways. That I don't know. It's like, because often before I even have a conversation with a Norwegian, I just tell them what I do. My background, so I can avoid all that.
Yeah.
Because immediately the look on their faces of going, okay, you're a journalist. Okay, for them that's weird, because of the color of my skin. As you can see, Chinese people are not inventive. I am very inventive. Sorry, so I'm just gonna have to throw that out there. Very creative too. Very big, huge population of us out there. So the thing was, it's I often try to avoid that kind of conversation as much as I can by throwing out as much as possible about my background of covering racism, human rights, blah, 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 blah. And eventually they quiet down and they become extremely careful of what they had to say to me. I almost enjoy that process a little bit because it's now you know how it feels to work on eggshells almost. And for me, it's the same. Sometimes I have to feel I have to minimize myself to kind of fit in. I don't know about you, if you feel sometimes you have to kind of minimize yourself, kind of be not quite yourself to kind of fit in. So.
I think I'm quite lucky working in Skyfri because it's a very diverse team. And actually, we have, I think, it's more people with minorities than actually native Norwegians working with us. One of our founders is also originally from Sri Lanka, is a minority, and so on and so forth. So, at least at work, I don't really need to be different because everybody is different, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But in other places, I understand what you mean, especially, and probably this has happened to you as well, especially when we come from ethnic groups or cultures that are usually very sexualized. It's the case of the hot Hispanic woman, but it's also the case of the Thai wife
exactly.
that they have here as well,
Yeah.
And you always feel that you need to be a bit careful all the time.
Yeah.
But I do believe, as you say, that there are those Norwegians who have traveled, who might have friends or acquaintances that come from other walks of life and from, other countries. And those are the ones, at least I usually interact with. But then you have a lot of people who has the same friends they had from school, which are mostly or most entirely native Norwegians as well, work with Norwegians, only go with to Norwegian stores, and they literally live a bit in a world apart as ours. And I feel that those are the ones who really don't want to hear any sort of critique to Norway, for example, to the healthcare. If you ever complain about healthcare in Norway, you will get the go back to your country. Or they don't want to accept that there is racism going on, because for there is also a matter of national pride. Is that if you say that there is racism in Norway, you are saying that there is something wrong with my country, and this hurts my pride because Norway is the best place in the world. And they also don't see their own privilege. Speaking of work, for example, and speaking about how having a name that is not native Norwegian hurts your chances to get a job. And there has been a lot of studies about this. It's around 20 to 35% less chances to be called. I remember a native Norwegian man saying, I don't believe that you have less chances to get a job because you have a foreign sounding name. I myself have never sent an application. I got an old job by friends and acquaintances. And I was like, yes, precisely. You have gotten all your positions by friends and acquaintances. You have a Norwegian network that immigrants don't have. Or people who might work in like been born in less favorable circumstances might not have. For example, somebody whose parents have menial or handworking jobs and wants to enter in, for example, a corporate type of work. They don't have this connection. They need to send an application.
No, exactly.
But they don't see it.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting that you raised the criticism part, because I don't think in Norway they handle criticism very well. No matter what it is, whether it's minor or major, they just don't handle it very well. So especially when it comes from a foreigner, they're like going, immediately there's a knee-jerk reaction like, go back to your own country. If you don't like us so much. Whereas if they were open, if they process their own fears, I think, if they process their own ego in a certain way, then I think they would be more like, I want to hear it. What can we improve better? Because I don't think because I see with startups, they are trying to hit the international market.
Yeah.
So if you're hitting it in the international market and you still have this framework as a Norwegian, I'm so sorry, I'm not saying all Norwegians are like this, but I'm just saying in general, the aspects of not that taking that criticism and changing, where we are seeing things, outside your bubble that can be changed, that could actually benefit you, benefit your country too. So there's two ways to go about it, right? There's the way of I don't want to listen to you, you're full of crap, go back to your country. And then there's one where let's celebrate this, let's improve on this, let's take on this. So I think what I'm hearing is from your HR background is that not only we need diverse from the bottom, we also need it on the top management role positions as well, to have that kind of responsibility. And on top of that, to understand their own biases and that having that kind of awareness that is necessary. And taking criticism, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I understand the difficulty of bringing diversity into a team that is already made and structured. But if you don't start, it will never come naturally. Because in the moment you have a team that is not diverse, those people who come from a minority background, they won't apply. And this has happened to me. I remember I was looking for positions as an HR director. And well, I saw a job ad and I entered to look into they say they were very diverse. I entered to look, and everybody in, manager up was ethnic Norwegian. And I didn't apply because it was like, are they going to consider my application? If they do, am I going to be the diversity hire? Am I going to fit into this position? I'm going to fit into this company. I'm going to fit into this role. Am I going to be heard in my experiences? And of course, at the end, I did not apply. And this is going to happen if you don't do nothing specifically to change the composition of your workforce.
And I think it's interesting because you brought this up earlier on as well, that you didn't think people would believe you in the story. And I think like when you work in a workplace where you don't feel like you're yourself and you're bringing your full potential to work, then no matter what you say, want to change, or like if you want to improve a system, they may not even, they brush you off perhaps, not even believing you. So I think that's a sad part for me, in that whole entire process. So before we round up, is there something you want to dive into? Do you want to share something that we haven't explored yet?
I think that probably I would like for people to not make the same mistakes I made, which is like just keep it all for yourself and don't talk to anybody about this. And I understand it can be difficult to speak up. Absolutely. I mean, I didn't do it. I wasn't brave enough. And I understand the fear of not being believed, or of, the re-traumatization of telling your story again and again and again. But I think it's important that we all start speaking up, because there needs to be a roar for those who don't want to listen to finally hear us. And I think that's very important. And I also think that maybe those like you, for example, who really contribute to this debate, people in HR or in positions of managerial positions like me, NGOs, other type of social influencers, if you want to call it like that, that we are also more open and more out and more available for people to say, hey, this is my story, this happened to me. And maybe I don't want you to take any action, I only want you to know that I had this happening to me. I think that's important. And I think we need to have a bit more of community for all of us. And I also think that we need to start to speak up, me included.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting what you said, because it's like when I started this work, I really didn't know too much of the meaning of it until I shared my own story, and also hearing other people's story. I want that story to be heard.
Yes.
And I find 10 years on living here, it's so sad for me to kind of still hear these stories and not really sure how change would happen. And I think it's really brave for you to speak up, because I know it's not easy. And also you are in a workplace right now, as well as you're in the workforce. And I know so many people tell me this, it's like, oh, if I share my story, if my boss heard my story, if my colleague heard my story, they may not like me anymore. I may even lose my job.
Yeah.
And I think what you kind of showing up today is saying you went to a workforce, a place where actually you can be yourself. For one thing, you said that your boss is from Sri Lanka, and I think he would understand this. I'm sure he has gone through his own experiences as well here, and I think that that safe space allows us to kind of speak up and be able to pave a way forward. And I think you working in HR would also do something similar in that sense. So I guess that's your advice to people. I guess for those who may be new or consider maybe coming over to Norway, I just because I want to explore this with you, because I think it was interesting. We had some conversations before we had this interview. Would you still have people move here? I'm quite curious about how your thoughts around this is that with people moving over to Norway, what would you say to them, and what would you prepare them?
I think immigrating to another country is a very individual decision, and it's impossible to generalize because we all have different individual circumstances. And even, for example, if you have a very good job in, let's say, Iran, if you are a woman or you are queer, you are like, look, I just prefer to wash dishes in Norway. Because I can be myself, I can love who I want to love, I can be free. So it's, who knows, it's a lot of here and there. For those who come to Norway, I think that it is important to understand that irrespective of whether you are the ethnic majority in the country you were born or you are even white, you might still face discrimination, and that's okay. And that discrimination is not, or racism, is not just like being beaten on the street. It's all these small microaggressions, like, and this happened to a girlfriend of a friend of mine. She's black. So in the cash registers that you do it yourself, she always gets the random control. Those small microaggressions, like, yes, why is the security guard following you through the store? Why is the person who checks the tickets in the Tebane coming to you first? That all this is racism and it's aggression too, and you need to speak about this. It's not only the big things. You don't need to go through an immensely traumatizing experience for you to speak up.
I think that's really important what you told us. The microaggression is the small things, it's the subtleness.
That
racism.
pile up, no?
Yeah, that keeps going on. And I think that's important for people to understand is discrimination isn't the one-time thing.
Yeah.
It's one thing that keeps going and keeps coming
Yeah.
for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And I think that's sad part, and I think I'm not sure if I'm coping well with it a little bit, honestly, as well as you are. And so I think it's something to be heard, to be known, and I think until we can put a face to it, as soon as we can put words to it and we can show it, I think that's where people will start really understanding the depth of discrimination and how that impacts us on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming
Thanks to
on,
you.
and thank you for sharing your story and being so open as well. So I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you for having me.